Here we can see that using the MBTI indicates that 60 to 75% of the general populations are extroverts, and that women are slightly higher than men in this preference. Introverts predominate in fields of study such as science among careers such as university teachings. According to McClure, the general population contains about 55% types judging, but studies of leaders show this to range upward of 91%, clearly indicating that preferences among positional leaders to reach closure and to get decisions made. So leaders come from all groupings of preferences, but clearly in certain patterns and preferences may exist in some careers or fields that draw those preferences as strengths. As with everything, the MBTI comes with its flaws and is not stable, and persons can change their patterns over time. The MBTI are occasionally used inappropriately. It would be inappropriate to hire decisions in hiring decisions to assume that someone can be no different from his or her four-letter source, when actually he or she might be well developed in using several preferences. However, the concept of personality preferences is helpful in understanding ourselves and as a framework of your own self-exploration. So now we move into approaches of learning. So, have you ever felt like you learn best in a particular way? Learning styles affect how we learn under certain conditions. Some students learn best by hearing information, while others learn best by seeing it. Different theories have emerged to describe how students prefer to learn best, including the Jongjai learning style. So extroverted learners enjoy generating energy and ideas from other people. They prefer socializing and working in groups. Learning activities that benefit extroverted learners included others who solve a problem, collaborative work, and problem-based learning. If you enjoy teaching others, participating in a group, and learning by experience, you are probably an extroverted learner. So approximately 60% of learners are extroverted learners. Extroverted learners learn best through direct experience. They enjoy working with others in groups. They often gather information from outside sources, willing to lead, participate, and offer options, and they jump right in without guidance from others. So while introverted learners are still sociable, they prefer to solve problems on their own. Introverted learners enjoy gathering energy and ideas from internal sources, such as brainstorming, personal reflection, and theoretical exploration. These learners prefer to think about things before attempting to try a new skill. If you enjoy solidarity, studying, individual work, and abstract ideas, you are probably an introverted learner. Where approximately 40% of these learners approximately 40% of learners are introverted learners. Introverted learners prefer to work alone. They enjoy quiet and solidarity. They often generate ideas from internal sources, prefer to listen, watch, and reflect. They like to observe others before attempting a new skill. So now we go on to sensing learning. Sensing learners are focused on aspects of physical environment. So Jung described these individuals as being interested in the external. They prefer to rely on information gained through experience. While people with a sensing learning style enjoy order or routine, they also tend to be very quick to adapt to changing environments and situations. Approximately 65% of learners have sensing learning style. So sensing learners, they focus on the present. They are practical and reasonable. They use experience and common sense to solve problems, and they keenly observe the surrounding world. Now we'll go on to intuitive. Intuitive learners tend to focus on the world of possibility. Unlike sensing learners who are interested in the here and now, intuitive learners enjoy considering ideas, possibilities, and potential outcomes. These learners like abstract thinking, daydreaming, and imagining the future. Approximately 35% of learners are intuitive learners. Intuitive learners prefer to work in short sessions rather than finishing all tasks at once. They enjoy new challenges, experiences, and situations. They are more likely to look at the big picture rather than the details, like theories and abstract ideas. Individuals with a thinking learning style tend to focus more on structure and function of information and objects. Thinking learners use rational and logic when dealing with problems and decisions. These learners often base decisions on personal ideas of right and wrong, fairness and justice. Approximately 55% of males and 35% of females have a thinking learning style. Thinking learners are interested in logic and patterns. They dislike basing decisions on emotions, and they make decisions based on reason and logic. So now we move on to feeling type learners. People with feeling type style manage information based on initial emotions it generates. So they are interested in personal relationship, feelings, and social harmony. If you base decisions on emotions and dislike conflict, you might have a feeling learning style. Approximately 45% of males and 65% of females are feeling learners. So feeling learners are interested in people and their feelings. They in tune with their own emotions and those of other people. They base decisions on immediate feelings, and they generate excitement and enthusiasm in a group settings. So we move on now to judging learners. Judging learners tends to be very decisive. In some cases, these learners may make decisions too quickly before learning everything they need to know about a situation. These learners prefer order and structure, which is why they tend to plan out activities and schedules very carefully. If you are highly organized, detail-oriented, and have strong options, you might be a judging learner. So approximately 45% of people are judging learners. Judging learners do not like ambiguity or mystery. They tend to be firm in their decision. They are very organized and structured. They have strong opinions, and they generally follow the rules. So lastly, we have perceiving learners. Perceiving learners tend to make decisions impulsively in response to new information and changing situations. However, these learners tend to focus more in indulging their curiosity rather than making decisions. Unlike judging learners who tend not to change their minds, perceiving learners prefer to keep their options open. If you tend to start, they tend to start many projects at once without finishing any of them. They avoid strict schedules. They jump into projects without planning. If you did all of those above, maybe you are a perceiving learner, where approximately 55% of the people are perceiving learners. Perceiving learners often make impulsive decisions. They change decisions based on new information. They dislike structure and organization. They tend to be very flexible and adaptable. And sometimes they have trouble making decisions. So now we'll do a recap with my colleague Adina.
So I hope you guys are still with us. We nearly finished, right? So let's recap what we covered. So we discussed some important aspects of your self-awareness that become key to understanding yourself as a participant and a leader. We explored ways to examine your strengths and weaknesses with the goal of developing your talents and having a realistic self-concept with healthy self-esteem and self-confidence. We also reviewed basic values that are essential in a person of character. And lastly, in relation to building on psychological and educational approaches to leadership, we talked about some models to assess your personality preferences and your learning preferences. So before we go, we just want to share a quote with you guys. So understanding yourself is like reading the manual of a high-tech device. You will discover various hidden features and specifications. You can discover hidden talents of yours. Find out what your strengths and weaknesses are by truly understanding yourself. So Ravi and I would like to thank you guys for tuning in into our presentation. We hope it was insightful. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, if there are no
No,
questions.
I just have a comment. I just like the theory with the bucket and the dipper.
So did I.
Yes, that was really, really, really nice. It was really good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, good evening, everyone. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Tanisha Edwards Mason, and I will be doing this presentation on understanding others with Aliyah Forrester. We'll talk about understanding others. If you have any questions during the presentation, please raise your hand and you'll be given the opportunity to speak. Please be sure to keep your mics muted while we are presenting. So, an overview on the chapter. So in this chapter, we will take a brief glance at certain aspects of gender, ethnicity, and culture that serve as illustrations of how differences need to be addressed in order to strive towards inclusive and empowered leadership. We will also discuss a variety of processes associated with leadership, such as communication, the resolution of conflicts and decision making, and how these processes are affected by a variety of methods. This chapter comes to a close with a review of the many communication skills that may be beneficial when we are interacting with other people in our leadership capacity. Some of these talents include empathy and assertiveness. Individuality and commonality. So in the previous chapter, Adina and Ravi did some introspection about your value system and the psychological preferences you have. Some people might be extremely similar to you, while others could be completely different. Even though other people seem to be the same, they can have different priorities, tastes, or ways of approaching the learning process. So I know everyone will know this lady here, which is Maya Angelou, who is very famous for a lot of quotes. Everybody does be using her quotes. So the accomplishments of a common human objective needs to act as the focal point around which our understanding of variety ought to be based. So the poet Maya Angelou has an amazing insight on the components of human nature that are universal and shared by all individuals. In her poem, Human Family, she comes to the conclusion that in spite of all our differences, we are more alike, my friends, that we are unalike. She goes over each of our unique qualities and outlines how they set us apart from one another. So some of these distinctions between ourselves and others are due to factors such as gender, race, culture, while others are due to the circumstances in which we were raised. When we compare to other existent human species, there are more similarities between us than there are differences. The finding of studies on the human genome, which is a set of genetic material that is present in a cell, have without a doubt shown this to be true. This is a possibility that you might see individuals of racial and cultural background. A school ring, a signet ring, or a wedding ring are examples of articles of symbolic importance and may be seen worn by people. So I think the police service may have a ring that police officers wear where they identify males and females will wear a wedding ring to show that, hey, we married, or you might have attended a secondary school or even a primary school, and they have a ring to show. So I just want to bring it into reality to say what we're speaking about. Everybody on the following so far?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Even if at the first glance it will seem like other people will not like you, you will be able to identify them if they have goals that you have, experiences that are similar to your own, or thoughts that you agree with, despite the fact that their outward appearance may have given the impression that they were not similar to you. It is possible that you and other people have things in common, such as interests in the same studies, like this leadership class that we are all studying here, or you're living in the same geographical location, or even political belief that are comparable, but we're not going to politics now. You might not find that you and other people share common interests, such as participating in the same activity at schools, going to the same gym on a regular basis, having children, or adhering to the same religious traditions. The realizations that there are other people in the world who share one's passion and principle may give birth to a feeling of belonging, also known as social identity, and can result in the establishment of sub-communities. Can anyone tell me what is social identity? Anyone know what is social identity?
Is it how people perceive you?
Well, not really how people is. It's like it indicates who you are in terms of which group you belong to. So social identity are groups usually defined by some physical or social and mental characteristic of individuals. There is something that links you to everyone around you, despite the fact that you may seem to be completely different from one another. This connection exists on a more basic level. There's a desire to comprehend the material covered in a certain class. You place a high emphasis on the objective of the meeting of the group that you attended. Doesn't matter whether it's a Bible study group, a golf club, or if you want to lobby for Costa to alter its policy about opening the library on weekends. It doesn't matter. In order to be a good leader, one practice that is important is to bring persons within the establishment of different culture, races, or beliefs together to achieve the common purpose of the company, which is to be efficient and effective when it relates to the goal of the organization. So anybody can give me an example of leadership? Anyone could give an example of leadership?
Would one be like organizing a group, a study group?
Yes, the organizing part, yes, but you see, like to just take a leadership could be anybody, eh? A child in a primary school could be a leader because they stand out and they say, you come, let's do this. And they're taking different children to do different things. Like simple things like that, that is leadership. When you take someone from a different background and you bring them together to work towards a common objective, that is considered leadership. I'm now going into another topic, which is understanding gender diversity. When it comes to men and women as individuals, gender norms are often restricted and wrong. For instance, despite the fact that only women are able to give birth, members of both sexes are responsible for the upbringing of young children. In the course of human history, men's participation in the growth and development of children have been restricted since this kind of work has traditionally been associated with femininity and caring. It would be impossible to list all the ways in which men and women are different because there are just too many. But it is critical that we acknowledge the fact that we all negotiate both sex roles and gender, despite the fact that the two categories are sometimes used interchangeably. Sex roles are those expectations that emerge from biology, such as pregnancy or masculine mass, while gender roles are expectations that are socially formed and labeled as masculine or feminine. Because they behave or are different from the typical paradigm, women are not nurturing. Women who are not nurturing and men who are not athletic may be subject to prejudice based on gender role expectations. In a similar vein, those who adhere to the conventional leadership expectations that leaders should be decisive, in charge, competitive, and self-reliant may be adhering to a traditional masculine paradigm that excludes a large number of women, in addition to a large number of men who are very capable, but who do not lead from that perspective. The numerous different signals that we take in from our surroundings begin to have an effect on our conceptions of gender roles from the very beginning of our lives. So even parents who make sure that the storybooks their children read do not promote gender roles or sex role stereotypes, and who give toys to the son and trucks to the daughters, will eventually come to the realization that other social agents such as peers, toys, television, and conversation, like just traveling to school every morning, will reinforce traditional gender message. The growth and development of children may teach us about how men and women have evolved through time to become who they are now. When we were younger, our playstyle helped shape who we are and we would become as men and women when we get older. The majority of boys play take outdoors in the rough and tumble activities and in circumstances where competition is present, extroverted. Leaders often issue directive. The difference between winning and losing become quite significant. The vast majority of games are played with teams. Even indoor games such as videos or computer games usually have layered a hierarchical structure, intricate rules and processes that need to dominate or eliminate one's opponent. These are the kind of games that are commonly favored by guys. Girls, on the other hand, are more likely to play indoors, either with one another or with a more intimate group of their friends. Intimacy and the importance of interpersonal connections are emphasized throughout their performance. The majority of the games they like to play have no winners or losers, but each player gets a chance to play. Examples like hopscotch, mora, skipping, or even playing dolly house. When compared to men, Girls are more likely to seek value and closeness and connection as a result of social learning that occurs with play and many other experiences, while males are more likely to want value and independence. In a world of connectors, in which people negotiate complicated networks of friendship, downplay differences, attempt to achieve agreement, and appreciate illusion of superiority that would emphasize differences, intimacy is most important thing there is. Because of the fundamental ways of creating status is by telling other people what to do, and following others is a hallmark of low status. Independence is essential in a culture that is concerned with status. Consider how common it is in the entertainment industry to see like actors portraying characters whose genders don't correspond to the expectations placed on them by society. I was wondering if you could think of a movie or television program in which women perform a part that is often considered to be reversed for a guy, or one in which a woman was in a cast role that is more often associated with men. Playing experiences throughout childhood may also contribute to a formation of thinking or feeling orientation, both of which are outlined in chapter 4 in the Jungian preference type. It is important to keep in mind that there's a considerable deal of diversity amongst men and women. Nonetheless, these patterns do help us become more aware and appreciate distinctions. The reasons that men and women provide for their achievements and shortcomings are often quite different. Many women have the propensity to attribute their achievements to exonerous forces such as chances of being in the appropriate location at the appropriate time. The fact that we are unable to stop pointing out disparities is evidence of continued existence of power dynamics in which men's customs, point of view, and artifacts have been accorded a great significance. Due to the fact that males have historically occupied many public leadership roles, the conventional paradigm of leader was often socially created as having the same attributes that are associated with men. People's usefulness in their communities is likely to suffer if they are subjected to expectations that restrict the variety of roles. They may play an attempt to stifle their uniqueness. However, our sexual orientation or gender is merely our facet of our identities that we bring to a given circumstance. Other significant aspects of our social identities, such as our culture, ethnicity, age, or sexual orientation, are shared by all of us. Next topic is understanding cultural diversity. Culture is nothing that comprises of how a group of people feel and act in relation to one another. It is the way in which they organize their information. A body of shared understanding is what it is. So culture can be defined as the sum of ways of living, including values, beliefs, aesthetic standards, expressions of patterns, thinking, behavioral norms, and styles of communication that a group of people has developed to assure its survival in a particular physical human. It is possible that we are so ingrained in our society that it makes it difficult for us to view it properly. Therefore, culture is a generic phrase that may refer to a workplace or a university campus. The process of becoming older or even a community of individuals who are of the same racial or cultural background any given organization will include members from a variety of cultural backgrounds. To foster to be inclusive, cooperation and shared sense of purpose, effective leaders need to cultivate and understand diversity. Having a stronger appreciation for diversity requires first having a more self-aware understanding of culture-informed assumptions that underlie it. Let's take a look at Guyana and Trinidad and the everlasting correction of curry chicken or chicken curry. So Guyana would have always been accustomed to referring to the dish as chicken curry, but Trinidad would be accustomed to it being curry chicken based on the order it is cooked. The concept of race and ethnicity have often been used while attempting to define culture. However, throughout American history, the topic of race has been a highly influential side of daily life, and this is something that persists to this day. Having an effect on every campus, it has been used to marginalize whole groups of people, and racism is something that students on campus face on a daily basis. The relational leader model, which places a strong emphasis on inclusion and empowerment, embraces the belief that a group, team, organizational committee, country, or world will be improved when all participants are heard, made visible, and valued for their contributions. This belief is at the heart of relational leadership model. Throughout history, the dominant culture, also known as culture that makes up the powerful majority, has not been forced to investigate the validity, oh Lord, of its ideas and practices since it is not negatively affected by them. Many times, the norms of the majority have become a criteria by which people who are not in the majority are judged. The increased focus on racial and ethnic diversity in the United States has resulted in a heightened understanding of what it means to be white of the European descent in the context of American society. To explain the idea of white privilege, Peggy McIntosh, as seen in the picture, an American feminist anti-racism activist speaker, came up with the metaphor of an invisible knapsack. So this knapsack does not weigh too much, yet it is packed to the brim with things that make your journey through life easier. Even well-meaning people who live in the culture of the majority tend to take for granted the benefits of white privilege, which includes the freedom to shop without being followed, the ability to purchase or rent housing of their choice, and the ease of locating toys and pictures of themselves that look like them. So I will now be handing you over to Aliyah, who will be presenting Understanding International Diversity.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would just need confirmation that you guys are seeing my screen.
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. How are you guys feeling? Are you all good? Everybody is awake?
A lot of information, yeah.
We are here. We are here.
Yeah, that was a lot, but yes, we are here.
Okay, nice. All right, so I would be speaking about understanding international diversity. This basically refers to diversity among the cultures of different countries, right? So understanding how to work with persons from other countries can be complex, but it can also be exciting and a rewarding experience. I have been actually afforded with the opportunity to experience this myself, as my job allows me to converse with multiple persons from different cultures. So basically, I would be conversing with persons from Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Bahamas, Jamaica. Just all of us would be coming together for one objective, which is to ensure that all employees are in their life cycle with my company that I work with, that it is in order, right? So to be successful in dealing with people from other cultures, managers need the knowledge about the culture differences and similarities among countries. They also need to understand the implications of differences and the skills required to act and decide appropriately in a culturally sensitive way. So just to give you a little insight, we may want to know where all of this leadership thing come out from. Why are we presenting on all of this? But the person who really would have came up with this idea is someone by the name of Robert House, right? He came about in the 1990s. He would have been along with a guy by the name of something Javid, can't remember his first name, but they came together and created Project Globe. So you may ask, what is Project Globe? Globe is an international research project aimed to it's aimed at creating, testing, and validating theories related to the relationships between culture and societal and organizational and leadership effectiveness, right? So Robert House, as I was just saying, he is a prolific writer. Just to give you a little insight about who he is, he was the founder of Globe in 1990. He was a professor at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, right? All right, so Globe again, they came about with that study that they would have been trying to master for all of these years. They came about with 9 dimensions of culture that differed from countries to countries. So the first one is assertiveness. And this is to the degree in which individuals are forceful, confrontational, and aggressive, right? This is opposed to being cooperative and compassionate. So, when you're in an organization and, your coworkers, they are so nice and they're telling you good morning. And if you ask them for help, they would be able to give you that help. There are some who are assertive and they will be forceful and they will be aggressive in any manner that they may put out work or anything like that, right? And if you're thinking about, okay, I want to move out of Trinidad and I would like to go into a country where I could not have that type of assertiveness within my organizations. Some examples of those countries that I guess you could stay away from is United States, Germany, Mexico, right? Because their communication is direct and ambiguous. The individual initiative is encouraged and relationships are likely to be competitive. So the countries that you would more look for to go at or migrate would be like Switzerland or New Zealand. The managers in these countries are more likely to look for consensus and operative decision makings and stuff like that, right? So then we would move on to future orientation. And this is to the degree which delayed gratification and planning for the future of value over a short-term gain, right? So countries that are high in the future orientation, they encourage investment for future payoffs over immediate consumption. It is similar to the ability of individuals to delay gratification. We could go on to gender differentiation, and that is to the degree which males and females equality is actualized, right? So countries that are high in the gender differentiation provides more opportunities for women and have more women in positions of power, right? So examples of those countries could be like Sweden, Poland, and Costa Rica. And I could attest for Costa Rica because I work closely with them in the organization that I am a part of. You would find that a lot of females are in the positions of vice presidents, presidents, CEOs, and I mean, it's not as though males are not recognized, but female empowerment in those countries are way higher than those, like, let's see, I don't have an idea. Oh yes, so it could be like Japan, Italy, and Egypt. You will not really find females having those high positions in those three countries that I just listed, right? So we go on to uncertainty avoidance. This is the degree which people are uncomfortable with risk and change. In high uncertainty avoidant countries, there is a greater emphasis on rules, structure, order, and predictability, right? And I could say three examples I could give, three countries, France, Japan, and Costa Rica again. But United States, India, and Sweden, you would find that they have a low uncertainty avoidance. Oh, hold on, I missed out one, sorry. All right, so let's go on to power distance. So power distance is to the degree which people accept an unequal distribution of power and status privileges, right? So in high power distance countries, there is respect for age and the title, and people are expected to follow rules, right? And there is more tolerance for concentrated power, right? Then we go on to institutional collectivism. So this is to the degree to which organizational and societal institutions encourage individuals to be integrated into groups and organizations. So in high institutional collectivism countries, collective distributions of resources and collective actions are encouraged. Group loyalty is encouraged, and even if it undermines the pursuit of individual goals. So United States is actually one country that is low in institutional collectivism, and it has been it has resulted in debates on appropriate work-life balance, right? So I'm sure that all of us could agree where that if you're working in Trinidad and rain is falling, obviously you could call your boss and say, boss, I'm sorry, I can't make it today. But in America, it's not really that simple. Here, we have afforded to be able to go to school and work. Most of us here are part-time students or even full-time, right? But sometimes when you're working over in the United States, it's not that simple. You know, you're not really able to manage the both, because as soon as you slipped with that job, you know, it's really easy for them to find someone else. So this is where the debate really comes about for them to say, okay, we need to have an appropriate work-life balance for our employees. Right, so now I would move on to last 3, which is in group collectivism, and this is more about the individual, right? So this is the degree in which individuals express pride, loyalty, and cohesiveness in their organizations or family. In countries with high institutional collectivism, individuals identify with their families or organizations and duties and obligations that determine their behaviors. So just to move away a little bit from the culture of our work environment, in India, there is this culture of theirs that if you're a part of a certain group, which is either middle class, high, or the low class, which is considered the poor, there isn't any amount of privileges that you would be able to have. So if you're poor, there's in certain places you can't go middle class. There are only certain families you would be able to marry your daughter into, but you know, the high class, you'll be able to have maybe unlimited resources or anything like that. So this is where I would say that where did I write? So this is the example of how there's a strong indication that is made between the individuals and who are in the group and who they are not, so to speak, right? To move on to the last, that's performance orientation. This is to the degree which innovation, high standards, and excellent performances are encouraged and rewarded. Countries with high performance orientation value materialism and competitiveness, and they expect to invest in training and to promote performance improvement, sorry. And last one, which is the human orientation. This is to the degree which fairness, altruism, generosity, and kindness are encouraged and valued as a measure of a country's humane orientation. Right, so in nations with high humane orientation, individuals are responsible for promoting well-being of others, as opposed to the state providing social and economic help. Right? Okay, so knowledge about other countries become increasingly important as the world becomes more connected, right? So some countries seem to be higher than others in different dimensions. For example, people in the United States they are thought to be more male dominant than people in England, but less than those in Germany, right? With that being said, when working with others from different nations, realizing they may differ from you in the dimensions mentioned in this report can help you understand them better and work with them more effectively. So the report that they are referring to is the 9 dimensions that I would have just read out, or what I would just spoken about, right? So just to give you an example as to what someone by the name of Rebecca Nathan would have done, she is an anthropologist, right? So she would have been an undercover person, or she would have went undercover and lived in a residence hall posing as a freshman, right? And she discovered that the single biggest complaint that an international student lodged against a US student was, and to be very blunt, it was their ignorance. You know, as the informants would have described it, by the ignorance, they meant that the misinformation and the lack of information that the Americas have, both on the countries and about themselves, it wasn't really available or really accessible for those who would have been either migrated from other countries or stuff like that, right? So now we go on to building multicultural appreciation. So to be an effective leader or a participant in a diverse organization, or even being a leader who brings diversity to organizations, it requires that we know more about developing an openness and appreciation of various cultures and aspects of how others may differ. So David Hoops presented an intercultural learning process model, which is what I'm going to be presenting here now. Okay, so the first stage is the ethnocentrism. Big word. All right. So this stage, we believe that our own culture or way of doing things is best, right? Even superior to others, people with ethnocentric views can be intolerant and even hostile to others from different culture. Racism and sexism grows from this space. As we expand our experiences, we begin to move out of the ethnocentrism and our awareness is raised. We begin to acknowledge that many different cultures exist. So with this first stage, it is really giving you that breakdown as to someone who may not be accustomed to your culture. As you can see this wonderful picture below where person is telling him to go back to Africa and the other one is telling him to go back to Mexico because they don't understand each other's culture. And this is where you would find, as what I would have just said, racism and sexism will grow from this part of this process that David Hoops would have created, the learning process that he would have implemented, right? So a perfect example of this is I could use myself. I may not know about other cultures away, and I may have just started a school. I may have just gone into a leadership and ethics class abroad, and they know nothing about Trinidad culture. And I start to speak as I'm speaking now, 100, talking really, really fast, and they would be telling me like they're not understanding what I'm saying and they try to shut me out and I don't understand what the lecturer is saying or anything like that. So it's like the person who, it could be anyone, they're shutting out another person's culture because they don't understand exactly what it is about. So then we would go into the other stage. Remember, we are in a semester where leadership and ethics has just started. So by being a part of the class for say 3 months, we're going to give it 3 months. Into the second week, we'll go into awareness, where this is now, this is when we begin to acknowledge that many different culture exists. As awareness of culture grows, we move to some level of understanding derived by experiences, learning, and acquiring information and knowledge. So this is where we would be now understanding, okay, Trinidadians speak fast. Trinidadians could cook because maybe you would have cooked some food, or you maybe moved up with your mom and she cooked some pilau, carried it to the place, what you call it, you carry it to class and it smell up the whole room. So now they know that Trinidadians could cook. So this is where the awareness comes, just using it as an example. right? This is where they would get to understand, okay, all right, let me open up to see a little bit as to what it is really happening, on what Trini culture is really about. So then they would move into the understanding phase, right? So this stage involves the acquiring of knowledge and information about other cultures on a rational and cognitive level. The individual begins to put pieces together, and the culture of the other culture from pieces of information about values, customs, and this occurs in a detached or separate way, right? So in this stage now, they realize, okay, trainees, they may have done some research on the internet, and they see, okay, so trainees, they have Carnival, and Carnival is the biggest show on earth. How come I didn't hear about that? And this is where now you would realize that the individuals, they would begin to open up a bit more and want to learn a little bit more about your culture, right? So then it will go on to this stage where is the acceptance and the respect, tolerance, right? So these two transition stages of awareness and understanding leads to a willingness to accept and respect that others do have a legitimate culture view. This tolerance has led not to an examination of one's own culture, but to the recognition that it may be all right for others to hold the view and values they possess from their cultural views. Some would say that acceptance is still a negative attitude. It may lead to the stability of tolerance, but does not yet place the same values on others' views as one's own. The transition from the tolerance step in the process towards multiculturalism moves towards the appreciating and valuing, right? So we are at the stage where they would know, which is we would call them our colleagues now, because we're on a good basis. Everybody is speaking. They want to know, okay, when could I book a trip to come and let us go to Maracas Beach, because they here have a nice bacon shack by Richards, and they want to know when Carnival is so they could come down and start, right? They could come down and at least play mass for at least once. This is where they start to accept your culture, right? This is where they themselves want to know more, right? They have accepted that, okay, this is a Trini, okay, this is how they speak. This is, okay, they are really funny. They say certain things, and I want to know what it is they're really saying. But they could cook. They have a lot of stuff. They have a lot of tourist attraction and everything like that, and they want to know more, right? So this is where they start to accept your culture for what it is and not what they see it to be, right? So now we go into the appreciating and valuing stage. So at this stage, one begins to understand that cultures have strengths and weaknesses. Such as understanding leads to appreciating and valuing of specific aspects of other cultures. A change occurs from objectivity to subjectivity, or considering cultural aspects in terms of one's own identity and value. Right? So, just an example again. This stage, as they said, one begins to understand that cultures have strengths and weaknesses. One of Trinidadians' weaknesses is that we are always late. So that is something that they may start to accept. One of our strengths is that when Trinidadians put their mind to something, they can do it and they will excel well. We are really talented with our hands and our minds. And when that comes out now, this is where they start to appreciate us for what we really do. Again, they are accepting our our culture for what it is, right? So then it goes on to the selective adoption, right? This stage is where the individual will try to adopt the new attitudes and behaviors from the culture. Now, we will try to advise them not to be like Trinities and be late everywhere they go, right? That is something that we will try to let them know. This is something that is naturally with us. It is in our DNA, right? But this is where they were trying to learn to make pilau like us, use our green seasonings and not season with black pepper and salt and stuff like that. You know, they would really try to do things in our way, the way that we will usually do it, right? So this is that stage. And finally, this is the final stage where that individual will feel so comfortable to communicate with many other trainees or even trying to communicate with different cultures and apply the steps that they would have used to be comfortable with a trainee, with others, so that, you know, they would start to accept more, right? So now we would move on to attitudes towards differences. But before I go on to that, does anyone have any questions? Everyone is clear?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so let's go towards let's go on to attitude towards differences. So how we view others who are different from ourselves is complex. There is some evidence that this is a developmental or sequential process where during which we move from complete unawareness as a child to some degree of acceptance or appreciation as a mature adult. Through the years, we begin to learn through positive and negative experiences as a result of these experiences. Some people learn to dislike and fear differences, right? So in the previous section, we would have spoken about the progression of ethnocentrism to multiculturalism, right? So now we're going to pay attention to the Riddle scale. So the Riddle scale is also known as the Riddle homophobia, the homophobia scale, or the Riddle scale of homophobia. So this was a psychometric scale that measured the degree to which a person is or is not homophobic. And this scale was frequently used in tolerance education about anti-discriminatory attitudes regarding sexual orientation. Right, so hold on, sorry. So the first step of the first 4 stages would be the negative attitudes of the scale, and that would be repulsive, pity, tolerance, and acceptance. So repulsion would be the highest, and acceptance would be the lowest. Right? I would elaborate as I go along. The second part of the scale would be the positive levels, which would be support, admiration, appreciation, and nurturance, right? So this scale was made by Dorothy Riddle. She developed this model originally as a scale for homophobia to understand attitudes towards gay and lesbian people. So Dorothy model is helpful as a conceptual model for understanding other differences, as well as attitudes towards people with physical disabilities or different religious practices. Right? So we may differ in personality preferences, attitudes, styles, value systems, beliefs, and opinions based on our cultural influences, right? So if I could just go back right here where it says culture influences on leadership behavior awareness of how such aspects of diversity such as sex, race, ethnicity, age, sexual identity, religion, ability, and all of this, right? What I've found is that when you are a part of a certain culture, this is where you don't accept certain things. So being realistic in the world today, when you're at a certain race, it's really hard to get through with certain things in life. When you're at a certain age, it's really hard to even try to do certain things with your life. When you're at, if you have a certain sexual identity, you're not being accepted. If you're a part of a certain religion, you can't walk certain places, you can't talk to certain people, and it's just a lot of this is really how to say, this is something that is really going on in the world now and we can relate to, and this is not only in the environment, but this is also really present in our organizations, right? So many leadership practices could be described as participative because they value the empowerment of followers, but relational and pluralistic leadership seeks to change the very culture of the organization or group to see the diversity of groups as a true asset. Okay, so repulsion. So, as I said, this now, these what I'm going to call out here is the negative levels of the scale, right? These here, when you reach the level of repulsion, this is where the views of people who this is when you view people and you're saying that they're strange, they're sick, they're crazy and adversive. Like then like when you view anything that will change them to be more normal, the part of the mainstream is justifiable, right? Then we go on to pity, where they view people, or the individual view people who are different as somehow born that way and feels that it is pitiful, right? It sees being different as definitely immature and feels preferred. So to help those poor individuals, one should reinforce normal behaviors. So as I said, repulsion is the highest level of it is the highest negative level of the scale. Pity would be the second, right? So tolerance, this is when the individual sees being different as just a phase of development that most people outgrows of, right? Thus, one should protect and tolerate those who are different, and one does a child, sorry, those who are different as one does a child who is still learning. And acceptance, which is the lowest, this implies that one needs to make accommodations for others' differences. It does not acknowledge that the other's identity may be of the different value of one's own. So we move on to the positive level. So support will be the highest positive level. So the individual works to safeguard the rights of those who are different. One may be uncomfortable with oneself, but one is aware of the climate and the irrational unfairness of our society. Admiration, this is where an individual acknowledges that being different from our society takes strength. One is willing to truly look at oneself, but work on one's own personal biases. Appreciation, this is where the individual values the diversity of people and is willing to confront insensitive attitudes. Nurturance, this is when the individual assumes the differences in people and indispensable in society, views differences with genuine affection and delights, and is willing to be an advocate for those differences. So we quickly move on to communication. Right. So some people may be highly, okay, so before I do that, you may observe a range of behaviors in a group, right? So I would just like to ask quickly, when leadership and ethics would have just started, could anybody give me at least two behavior that they would have observed with this group? Any that you're seeing here that you think may be in context to what you would have noticed?
People were verbally reserved. They were not talking much.
That is true. That's very true.
I was just about the same thing. There are some people who are highly verbal. However, there are those of us who are verbally reserved.
So you could safely say that our group is a mixture of highly verbal persons and verbally reserved persons. And that is
Right.
right. So some people may be highly verbal with strong origin. Sorry, let me start that over. Some people may be highly verbal with strong oral traditions. Others may be verbally reserved, preferring thoughtful writing. So I'm sure if Mr. Bisu would say, okay, type in the chat what you think about this, maybe we would have had a more response, because as you realize that persons are more verbally reserved. If they had the chance to write, they would write more than actually speak out, right? But that's okay. Some may be outgoing, some may be expressive and emotional, whereas the culture assumptions of others lead them to be thoughtful, objective, and analytical. Depending on the mix of individuals, some will be open and revealing, whereas others may be closed and guarded. And then some cultural assumptions lead people to be direct and factual. Others have learned to be symbolic and metaphorical. Some have been taught to value direct bold eye contact. Others find respect in indirect body language. Some have learned to be timely and value promptness, and other cultures valued just casual approaches, right? So instead of judging others to be wrong or disrespectful, it is useful to ask yourself within the person's context, how do I understand this action or practice, right? So understanding the mix of preferred communication pattern is in any group, it helps the group to be more informed in its interaction, right? The aspect of communication we have found to be useful is speech communities. So speech community is basically, it exists when people share norms about how to use talk and what purpose it serves. And this can be important to keep in mind because persons from different speech communities may misunderstand each other. So let's use a Trini example. So for all those who don't know anything about all fours, right? To me, it could be all fours or any complex card game, right? So that is a perfect example of speech community. If you're not accustomed to the game, you may not understand the communication that the persons may use because, for all fours, you may see somebody doing a kind of hand movement and then they're doing something to like a bird coming. And, that is something that is that person high, or is that person okay, need to carry you St. Anne's or whatever, because you're not in the game, or you're not accustomed to having that type of language or that type of interaction with somebody where a card game is concerned. So that is where speech communities comes in. So speech community can be determined by gender, ethnicity, workplace, interests, other groupings that share a common core of patterns about language and how it is used. Recognizing and respecting different speech communities increase our ability to participate competently in a diverse culture. So I remember back in my days, inside jokes and acronyms, that was something that I used to really enjoy in school. So there's two types of communications, right? So there's verbal communications and non-verbal communications. So like verbal communications, non-verbal pattern reflects on values, perspective, norms, and heritage of specific cultures. This is one of those areas in which we cannot find ourselves saying, I don't know what the big deal was, this wouldn't have bothered me. But we are trying to connect with others, and it is imperative to remember that differences is just different. I think I read that wrong. It is imperative to remember that different is just different. Different is not wrong. So sometimes we may say something and it may have come across really wrong, or the person we're speaking to, the message was not conveyed properly to them. But there are many ways that we could help them to understand what we're trying to say. And it could be either verbally or non-verbally, right? So we move on to conflict resolution. So you might observe individuals with a range of behaviors from confrontational to very subtle, right? Some may encourage taking responsibility and being accountable. Others just tend to blame. Some others will seek harmony and face saving. Some believe their way is right and are close to any other options, whereas others seek connections among options. Some resolve conflict by being differential to authority, whereas others have learned to be confrontational to authority figures, right? So finally, some people will link resolutions to values like harmony with nature. Conflict resolution is a critical aspect of relational leadership, right? Almost any change effort will involve some degree of conflict. Remaining focused on the purpose of the change while maintaining positive relationship is necessary. But at the same time, it is also important to remain ethical and inclusive. This is certainly challenging, right? But even more necessary in times of conflict, when the tendency can be to try to go to it alone, or try to just make it all go away. Right. So let's go to decision making. So decision making in some groups, the way in which decisions are made reflects either those who value the power of majority, who value the power of majority rules and prefer voting for those who seek inclusion of the minority opinion and value consensus, right? In some groups, if the will of the group does not emerge as apparent, an issue may be dropped completely and brought up at a later time. Some believe that the Okay, I can't pronounce that word now, but it's hierarchy. So some believe that the hierarchy and the authority should decide, whereas others think that the experts or those involved should decide, right? So sometimes what we can do is ask ourselves two questions, right? This is only for the individual to understand that person, right? It's not to persuade them. So it's basically you just ask them, you can ask yourself, how does my perspective and preference shape my view? Or, and in what ways could I be understood more correctly and understand with greater insight, right? So we're on the last topic, which is leadership and communication. So communication skills involve far more than persuasive talking and skillful writing, right? So the Chinese language, like many Asian languages, include symbols that depict related concepts to create new meaning. The Chinese pictogram for listening is made up of the symbols for ears, eyes, and heart, as you can see the picture that it shows here. So one student I pulled this from the book, a student leader told the author, God gave me two eyes and one mouth. So I figured that the message is to listen more and to listen more than I talk. And I know most of us would always hear our parents tell us, listen more, talk less. So I guess it comes from a long way, right? So for most of us, hearing is natural, right? And almost an automatic process. Listening, however, is more difficult and is a purposive activity requiring one to be intentionally mindful. True listening is far from a passive activity. Listening and communicating is a pluralistic context that requires one to listen with empathy. Listening with empathy is an intellectual and emotional participation in another person's experience. So empathy means you are using another person's standards and reference points to understand the person's experience, right? So, okay, so I would like you to imagine this, right? So imagine a friend with low self-esteem comes to you and say, I made a comment in our meeting today and it was awful. People, they laughed at me, right? So if someone came to you and say somebody came to you, like I guess it could be a schoolmate, could somebody tell me what their response would be to that? Or how would they react? Is anybody hearing me? Okay. Somebody
Hi.
just hi.
According to how the person is feeling, you would try to sympathize with that person, especially if it's your friend and you have a really good relationship with them. You would know that person and how they feel, their emotions and stuff like that. So you would try to put yourself in their place.
Right. So what is something that you would tell them to like if it is I come to you, okay, you can say we are friends, and I come to you and I explain that to you, like, oh my gosh, I feel it so awful, the comments I made today, people laugh at me. What would be your response to me where that is concerned?
Well, first I would say, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to hear hear that, but I think you should try to probably look beyond it and move on, and try not to be depressed about that. It's gone, you know. That's gone.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much for commenting. So that actually is not a sympathetic response. That is an empathetic response. So let's differentiate for you guys, right? So showing sympathy is remembering times that you have said things like, you know, they just, the person would need like a boost, right? So you might say something like, oh, I'm sure it wasn't that bad, or what are you sorry, oh, I'm sure it's not that bad, and what you said, it maybe was humorous, or probably no one even remembers that. You know, that is where they show sympathy. But responding with empathy, however, you know, the person might say, I know it is hard. I know it's hard for you to really speak in a meeting, and you don't really speak in those type of settings, and it must be very scary. So the difference between sympathy and empathy is that when you're speaking to someone with empathy, that you tend to be more genuine. And, you know, the second response, it leads to that genuine and dialogue that the first person, they denied their friend that emotion and the apparent pain of that experience, right? So, yeah, right. So with this method, you would learn how to listen with empathy. And this method came from Carl Rogers, right? The guy who you're seeing here within the picture. So he's a renowned psychologist, right? With his method of empathy, you would try to find a point of agreement or genuine understanding with a previous speaker and build on build on it instead of immediately criticizing and rejecting or denying the point, right? This requires one to pause, think, and restate for understanding. So then they could build on that point. You know, criticizing criticism that comes too quickly leaves the first speaker, thinking he or she was not heard. Because this is where you really have to think about how you are responding to somebody and their experiences, right? So I'd like you to think of the complexity of processes in typical conversations, the context of which we say or how we say it is influential to the receiver, informing meaning to what we share, right? Because as I said earlier, when I was speaking about communication, communication can be both verbal and non-verbal. Verbal communication is when you use speech or spoken word to exchange information, emotions, or thoughts. Where conversely, non-verbal communication is conveying and exchanging messages without the use of spoken words. Each element in that process is influenced by our cultural and gender lenses, right? So I would like an honest response on this, right? So let's look at an example. Who would you say speaks more, men or women? Don't be afraid to say whoever. It's really important that you be honest with this one.
Men.
Woman.
I think women speak more.
Sorry, I didn't hear you properly.
I
Women.
think women speak more.
Women speak more. Okay. So there's a mixture of who said men, and there's a mixture who says women. Okay. So common stereotypical perceptions is they most say that women would speak more. Yet, in almost any educational class or settings, men likely will be the first to speak, and they will speak more, often for longer periods. But I think our class is a perfect example because majority of the times it's the guys that are speaking. Am I wrong or am I correct?
For this class, I agree with you. The men speak more.
With the exception of tonight.
True.
With that exception.
Great. All right. So what men and women include in their speeches, it varies as well. Another way of stating that is that male prefer report talking and female engage in rapport talking, which is they talk more about every other thing, but males they more speak on I don't want the ladies to come from here, but they stay to the topic on what we're talking about, right? But male speeches promote their independence and is often used to share opinions and tell jokes or to relate stories. Women's speeches, even in public settings like meetings or classes, seeks to find connections with others and build relationships, right? Okay. So as we wind down, we'd like to ask, what is assertive communication? So it is the ability to speak and interact in a manner that considers and respects the right and opinion of others while also standing up for your rights, needs, and personal boundaries. Right? So with that being said, as the I took this example from the book. It asked the question. So if someone called you from work and they said, "Could you substitute for me at the event tonight? I've had something come up and cannot go after all." So an assertive response would be, "Okay, sure, I guess," because that person they usually they let persons deny their own rights, or they are too intimidated to say no, right? They are afraid to say no. But an assertive response will be, "No, I have other plans, so I cannot do it." They are the ones who will not feel guilty about making any decision or saying no. Now we have an aggressive response. "How dare you ask me to do this? You always slack off on all of your responsibilities and I won't stand for it." Well, that sounds like the boss. But that response, it really denies that other person from asking anything. And most times it could be really inappropriate, right? So we move on to the relational empathy. So this is basically a pluralistic learning approach for teaching empathy and grows from and incorporates different understanding of empathy, and they have been articulated in the disciplines of aestheticism, psychology, primatology, psychology, physiology, medical ethics, and neuroscience. The theory of relational empathy was constructed for the purpose of creating a broad and inclusive perspective of empathy. It's suitable for changing habits of behaviors and transforming organizational cultures. Relational empathy goes beyond merely understanding another. So, which is the emphasis is upon the recreation in the listener of the meaning originally created by the speaker and seeks shared meanings. Last slide. As I would have said earlier, where this is concerned, in this topic, it's really about you thinking about doing work. Like we'll speak about it as doing a project, right? And like if you're in a group and you realize people, they're just slacking off, you would just end up doing all of the work, and then no one really would really care, and you would then look for evidence of those assumptions, and at those smallest indications you would think, you know what, I had this assumption long time ago that, I, in this group, doing group project, I always would just do my work for myself, but instead, look at it at this way. Going into your first project committee, you're thinking, we are all busy and we will have to be careful about what we take on, but people will want to do their part and we can come up with something worthwhile. There are very real differences in environments, and groups may be negative in one setting and welcoming in another, right? So for conclusion on what you would have learned in this very, very long, this long chapter, the ability to understand others and be understood by others, and together create an effective organizational or group environment is the challenge of leadership. Truly understanding the influences of our cultural heritage, gender, and other aspects of our difference helps us work together towards change. We usually find we are more alike than we are different. Expecting commonalities, goodwill, and shared purposes can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This awareness helps us to create new shared cultures in any group. So is there any questions? No. Okay. All right. So I would like to thank each and every one of you for listening and being interactive. Thank you, Mr. Bisu, for giving us the opportunity to present on this topic. It was really, really informative, and I hope you guys enjoyed.